April 14, 1912. Picture this. You have the most luxurious, technologically advanced ship ever built, just gliding through the icy, pitch-black waters of the North Atlantic. People genuinely called this vessel Unsinkable. And on board, you've got this incredible cross-section of humanity. Some of the absolute wealthiest individuals on the planet rubbing shoulders, separated only by a few decks, with thousands of hopeful immigrants looking for a brand new life in America. But just hours later, a disaster of an unprecedented scale would strike, claiming over 1,500 lives and cementing itself as one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history. We are, of course, talking about the Titanic. Okay, let's dive into this. The ship that was called Unsinkable survived only 4 days at sea, but its story has survived for more than a century. It's just a massive, dramatic paradox, isn't it? 4 days of actual life for the ship, but well over 100 years of legacy. To really wrap our heads around why this specific story has gripped human consciousness for so long, we have to understand the world that built it. We need to look at the immense pride and, frankly, the profound overconfidence that set the stage for such a tragedy. Part 1. The hubris. Building an unsinkable dream. Now, you've got to put yourself in the mindset of the early 20th century. Ocean liners weren't just taxis across the water. They were the ultimate symbols of national pride and tech progress. It was an era of fierce, almost cutthroat competition, specifically between the British company White Star Line and their arch-rival Cunard Line. So, to completely dominate the Atlantic, White Star Line hatches this plan to build 3 gigantic luxury ships. 15,000. That represents the sheer, staggering human effort required to bring this dream to life. We're talking 15,000 workers at the famous Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, dedicating their literal blood, sweat, and tears to building the Titanic, right alongside her sister ships, the Olympic and the Britannic. Construction kicked off in 1909, and this massive workforce was putting together what was, at the time, one of the absolute largest moving objects ever created by humans. To put that scale into perspective, the Titanic was nearly 269 meters long and weighed over 46,000 tons. I mean, that is an almost incomprehensible amount of steel and machinery to push across an ocean. For the people living in 1912, standing next to the Titanic was like looking at the future, made real. It was this monumental, physical manifestation of humanity finally conquering nature. And the interior? It totally matched that monumental exterior. We are talking unprecedented, future-facing luxury here. Opulent restaurants, those grand sweeping staircases we've all seen, swimming pools, full gyms, and even electric elevators, which, was basically sci-fi technology back then. When the ship departed Southampton for New York City on April 10, 1912, the atmosphere was just euphoric. Over 2,200 passengers and crew were aboard. You had the incredibly wealthy, folks like John Jacob Astor IV, mixed in with families risking it all for the American dream. Everyone was enjoying a level of luxury unlike anything seen before. Absolutely no one could have imagined what was waiting for them in the dark. Which brings us to part 2, the catalyst, the unseen danger. As the Titanic moved out into the open ocean, the weather was fine, the sea was calm, everything seemed perfect. But a fatal cascade of errors was about to unfold, and there's a really tragic, deadly irony here. The sea was unusually calm that night. Now, you'd think perfectly calm water is exactly what you want on a sea voyage, right? Actually, scratch that, it was the worst-case scenario. Calm waters meant there were no waves breaking against the bases of the hidden icebergs. Without that splash of white water against the ice, these deadly icebergs essentially camouflaged themselves into the completely still, pitch-black ocean. It made them nearly impossible for the lookouts to spot. Let's follow this timeline from April 14th to see how the tension really builds. As they're crossing the Atlantic, other nearby ships are actively reporting dangerous ice fields. In the evening, several clear ice warnings get transmitted by wireless operators, explicitly warning of large icebergs right in Titanic's path. Yet as night falls, Captain Edward Smith, who was actually nearing his retirement, maintains the ship's high speed. Historians generally agree that his extreme confidence in the ship's design was the driving factor behind ignoring those warnings. Finally, at approximately 11:40 p.m., the lookouts spot an iceberg directly ahead. The warning bell rings out. Evasive maneuvers are frantically ordered, but it's just too late. The iceberg violently scrapes along the starboard side. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer mathematical reality of that collision. You see, Titanic's designers believed the ship could stay afloat even if 4 of its watertight compartments were flooded. That was the whole unsinkable guarantee. But that scrape, it tore open the hull below the waterline, damaging 6 compartments. Water immediately starts pouring in. The mathematical tipping point was breached. In that single moment, the unsinkable ship was doomed. Part 3, the catastrophe, the final hours. So below the waterline, the fate of the ship is totally sealed. But up on deck, the reality really took time to set in. The collision itself felt surprisingly minor at first. A lot of passengers barely even noticed it, and some were literally joking around, kicking chunks of ice on the deck. But as the crew members began quietly preparing lifeboats, a devastating regulatory failure became painfully clear. Outdated maritime regulations meant the Titanic carried lifeboats for only about half the people on board. The laws just hadn't caught up to the massive size of these new superships. The order was given, women and children first. But because people genuinely still believed the ship was perfectly safe, many of those incredibly precious few lifeboats were lowered into the water partially empty. The timeline of the actual sinking is just harrowing. By midnight on April 15th, the crew was in a full scramble with the lifeboats. But as we move past 2 a.m., the situation turns truly catastrophic. The front section, the bow, is sinking deeper and deeper into the ocean, and it's literally pulling the ship down. The stern lifts dramatically high into the night air. Passengers are clinging desperately to whatever they can hold on to, and then, just minutes later, the colossal ship snaps apart under its own immense weights and vanishes entirely beneath the surface of the Atlantic. So the crucial point is 0. The water temperature was near 0 degrees Celsius. With the ship completely gone, over 1,500 people were suddenly plunged into the freezing water. In temperatures that extreme, hypothermia takes hold unbelievably fast. It's a tragic reality that most of the victims in the water perished within minutes, not from drowning, but from the unbearable cold. The devastating human cost of that night, it really cannot be overstated. Out of the roughly 2,200 people who set sail with such incredible hope and excitement, 1,500 lives were lost. Only around 700 people survived to see the morning light. Which leads us to our final section, the awakening, rescue, and reforms. Several hours later, after picking up those desperate distress signals, the nearby RMS Carpathia rushed to the scene and rescued the survivors shivering in their lifeboats. As the news hit the morning papers, a global shockwave just radiated out. The world was utterly stunned. The public's unshakable confidence in human progress and tech was profoundly shattered. However, from this horrific tragedy came strict, blood-bought maritime reforms. Driven by massive investigations in both Britain and the US, the safety laws that we take completely for granted today were born right here. Ships were immediately required, no exceptions, to carry enough lifeboats for absolutely everyone on board. On top of that, continuous 24/7 radio monitoring became the new standard, ensuring a distress call would never, ever again go unheard in the dark. For decades, the ship rested in the silent depths, nearly 4,000 meters down, completely untouched. But then, in 1985, explorer Robert Ballard finally discovered the wreck. And that monumental discovery kind of reignited the whole world's fascination. It sparked countless books, compelling documentaries, and obviously that massive blockbuster movie. The Titanic was transformed from a historical tragedy into this enduring, almost mythic cultural legend. The Titanic was always meant to be more than just a ship. It was the ultimate symbol of human ambition and supreme confidence. But looking back at it, it leaves us with this really haunting question. Will our greatest technological achievements always remain vulnerable to the unpredictable power of nature? The story of the Titanic stands as a permanent reminder that no matter how grand our designs get, we absolutely must respect the profound forces of the world around us. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the history that shapes our present.